Did you know that when you lose weight, you not only reduce fat deposits, but you also lose muscle mass? And this process is not the same for everyone. In this video, I'll explain why and what role your genes play in this. In 1981, 23 prisoners in a Northern Ireland prison went on a hunger strike. They completely stopped eating and only drank water. Some broke the strike after some time, but 10 of the prisoners continued until the bitter end. Approximately 60 days after the strike began, they tragically died from the consequences of malnutrition. As sad as the story is, from a scientific point of view, it shows an interesting phenomenon. Although the prisoners had different fat reserves at the beginning of the strike, they all died relatively simultaneously after about 60 days. But how can this be? Isn't fat the stored reserve energy, and shouldn't the prisoners with more fat reserves live longer? The process behind it is actually a bit more complicated. When a person stops eating, the necessary energy is partially obtained from fat reserves. However, some organs such as the brain need a different fuel, glucose, to continue working. The body does not obtain this from fat, but from another source, the amino acids, which are primarily found in muscle mass. So the body inevitably starts to break down muscle mass as an energy source in addition to fat reserves. While the amount of fat reserves varies greatly from one person to another, the available muscle mass is relatively similar in different people, with some exceptions. So it was the similar but eventually diminishing muscle mass that led to the death of all 10 prisoners at around the same time. What we learn from this is that we can all survive around 60 days without food, but more importantly, that the breakdown of muscle mass is a problem during weight reduction. Therefore, during a diet, we must pay special attention to losing as much fat and as little muscle mass as possible. And there's another important point. Our genes can either help us maintain muscle mass or even work against us. Let's take a closer look at this process. An overweight person begins their diet with excessive fat reserves and a normal amount of muscle mass. If the person remains consistent, the fat reserves gradually diminish. And genes play a role here. They ensure that as little muscle mass as possible is broken down. As the fat reserves decrease, the muscles are hardly broken down and a slim, muscular body remains. However, not everyone has such optimal genes. If these important protective genes are defective, the process unfortunately looks differently. The person starts again with excessive fat and a normal amount of muscle mass, but this time the genes are not available. The body starts to excessively break down muscle mass as well, until at the end there's less fat, but also shrunken muscle mass remaining. But what options are there for generally maintaining muscle mass? Endurance sports are a good way to burn as many calories as possible in a short period of time. However, it is only suitable for building muscles to a limited extent. More appropriate is targeted strength training, where muscles are pushed to the limits of their strength. With a diet that has a surplus of calories, the muscles would start to grow. But with a diet that has a calorie deficit, muscle loss would be combated as best as possible.